Today's topic is actually something that I think is super relevant, especially if you are currently looking at new launches or maybe you're planning to enter the market sometime this year. I'm sure you know of people who enter into those very popular launches. You know, the kind that during launch weekend, 80-90% sold? A lot of the buyers see the crowd, see everyone rushing in and units flying off the chart, and naturally they start to feel a bit of a FOMO. But the problem is that when you buy because of FOMO, sometimes you may unknowingly overpay, and that's something we've discussed before. But today, I want to talk about another group of buyers, the buyers who actually manage to buy cheap. Because in our heads, buying cheap sounds like the safest thing to do, right? We always think, if I buy cheap, how wrong can it go? But here's something interesting that I've observed over the years. Just because you buy cheap doesn't automatically mean you will maximize your upside. In fact, I've seen buyers enter the same project, some even on the same day, but one ends up making significantly more than the other. Why is that so? Not because they bought a different project, not because they had special insider info, but simply because they chose a better unit. So the question becomes, how do we find that sweet spot? How do we identify the units that are not just affordable, but also gives us the best probability of maximizing future upside? So today, I want to share two very simple things that I always look at whenever I'm analyzing a new launch for my clients. Honestly, once you understand these two concepts, you will never be able to look at launch day unit selection the same way again. So before we jump in, if you've been enjoying the market analysis and project breakdowns that I've been sharing, do consider subscribing to my channel. And if you know of someone who's actively looking at new launches right now, feel free to share this video with them as well, as your support will really push me to create more content like this. Alright, let's get started. So the first thing I always ask myself is this: what exactly is the USP of the project? Now, this sounds very obvious, but you'll be surprised how many buyers completely skip this step. Think about it. Every new launch has multiple blocks and stacks, different facings, different floor levels, but not every unit captures the USP of the project. So before we talk about which stack to choose, before we even talk about whether a unit is cheap or expensive, we need to first understand what buyers are actually paying for. Let's look at a few examples of some recent new launches, and then you think and tell me what's the USP for each of them. First, we have Zyon Grand. If I ask you today what is the USP of Zyon Grand, there are already so many projects around River Valley area, so why would somebody specifically choose Zyon Grand? For me, the answer is quite straightforward. One of its biggest USPs is the height. It's one of the very few developments in the area, in Singapore in fact, that goes above 60 stories. So people don't just buy into it because of the swimming pool, because of the facilities that everyone has. They are buying into the skyline view to be above the surrounding developments. So when I look at Zyon Grand, immediately I know that the USP is the height and the high floor experience. Now, let's look at another example, Pinery Residence. What do you think people are paying for here? Is it the view? Not really. The reason most people are attracted to Pinery Residence is really the convenience. You have a direct linkway to Tampines West MRT, and you also have retail such as your F&B, your supermarket, everything right downstairs within reach. So buyers aren't primarily choosing Pinery Residence because they want a beautiful park-facing view, a pool-facing view, no. They are choosing it because they want convenience, and that's the USP for this development. Then we have River Modern. This one is probably the easiest example. People buy River Modern because of the river-facing view. There are over 3,000 of units coming into the River Valley area, all TOP around the same time in 4 years. If somebody specifically chooses River Modern, chances are they are paying for that river frontage. They are paying for that view. That's the USP. So by now, identifying the USP should be relatively straightforward, but here's the thing. Just because a project has a strong USP doesn't automatically mean you should buy it. Because what if you're overpaying for it? Imagine if the USP is river facing like such. For example, for River Modern, and let's say for example, you pay 3,800 per square foot. Is it still worth it? And that's why identifying the USP is only step 1. Step 2 is equally important, and that is understanding the developer's pricing strategy. Because once you understand what a USP is, the next question becomes, am I paying a reasonable premium for it? Am I overpaying for it? And generally speaking, there are 3 common pricing strategies that developers use. The first being per floor jump. The second is the view jump. And the third is the unit type jump. Now, don't worry if this term sounds unfamiliar to you. I'll walk you through a few examples one by one so that you can have a clearer idea. So let's start with the per floor jump pricing strategy. This one is probably the easiest one to understand, and I'm going to use Pinery Residences as an example. Now, naturally, as you go higher in the building, the price should increase. That makes sense, right? But however, if the first floor and the top floor are exactly the same price, everyone would just buy the highest floor. So developers usually apply a premium as the floor level increases. So typically for a lot of the projects, the per floor jump is about 0.5%, and that's quite normal. But what becomes interesting is when developers suddenly introduce a much larger price gap at a certain level. So for example, for Pinery Residences, you see over here that the pricing is relatively consistent until a certain floor level. Then suddenly the premium jumps from around 0.5% to almost 2%. Now, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. If you're looking at level 6 and level 7 and the jump is suddenly $30,000, does it really make sense to pay the extra premium? Personally, if I were buying into this project and I see this pricing strategy, I would probably take level 6 before that huge jump. Then if I miss level 6, then I'll probably consider level 5 before moving upwards to level 7 and then level 8. So I would think very carefully before paying that large premium just to move one level higher. So this is exactly why understanding the developer's pricing strategy is so important, because sometimes the best value isn't the highest floor. It's the floor immediately before the big jump. So whenever a project adopts the per floor jump strategy, my general approach is quite simple. I'll usually look at the low to mid floor range, and if that floor range also happens to capture the USP of the project, then that's when you can gain an edge above the others. Because now you're getting the USP, while avoiding some of the heavier pricing premiums that the developer has already loaded in the higher floors. Now, let's talk about the second pricing strategy, which is the view jump strategy. For this example, let's go back to Pinery Residence. Earlier, we identified that the USP for Pinery is convenience. People buy it for the transport connectivity, the retail component, and the fact that everything is nearby. That's the main reason that people are attracted to this project in the first place. Now, if you look at the different facings available, you'll realize that there are actually quite a few choices. So some units face the greenery on this side, some faces the pool, and some faces the HDB blocks. Naturally, some views will command a premium over others. But here's the question I always ask myself. Is the view actually the USP of the project here? Because if the answer is no, then we need to be very careful about paying a huge premium for the view. Think about it. If somebody is choosing Pinery because they want the convenience, then naturally we'll be focusing on the stacks that best capture that USP. Which stacks are the closest to the MRT and the amenities, and which stacks give me the convenience that buyers are ultimately paying for. And this is where a lot of buyers get distracted. They see a nice park-facing view or even a pool-facing unit. They see a beautiful view and immediately think it must be the best stack. But is that really what future buyers will be willing to pay for the most? Remember, when we are buying here, we're not just buying for ourselves. We also need to plan for our exit strategy and think about what the next buyer values. If the USP is convenience, then that should remain our priority. And this is why for projects that adopt the view jump strategy, I always separate the projects into 2 categories. The first category is where the view itself is the USP, and the second category is where the view is simply a nice bonus. For example, if we look at a project like Vela Bay, this is located in the Bayshore area, people are specifically choosing Vela Bay because of the sea view. In that situation, paying some premium for the view makes sense, because that's exactly what buyers are coming for. But if the view is not the USP and the developer is charging a very significant premium, then I would think twice. because you're paying extra for something that may not be the main reason future buyers choose the project. So when it comes down to the view jump strategy, I usually ask myself 2 questions. Is the view actually the USP? And second, if it is, am I paying a reasonable premium for it? And one way to determine this is by looking at the resale market. How much more are buyers willing to pay for the superior view? If the resale market consistently shows that buyers are willing to pay a premium for that view, then perhaps paying a reasonable premium today makes sense. But if the launch premium is already too high, then your potential upside becomes quite compressed. Now let's move on to the third pricing strategy, which is something we're seeing more and more in today's market. And this is called the unit type jump strategy. Historically, developers would usually load the highest PSF into the smaller units. So if the 2-bedroom was selling at a significant PSF, you would expect the 3-bedroom to be slightly lower and then the 4-bedroom to be even lower. That used to be how developers price the unit types last time. But today, we're seeing something very different. Let's use Narra Residences as an example. To make things fair, we are comparing units with the same facing and roughly the same floor level. Now, if we look at the 2-bedroom plus study, it's selling at around 2211 per square foot. Traditionally, you might expect the 3-bedroom to be of a cheaper per square foot basis and the 4-bedroom to be even cheaper. But that's not what's happening. In fact, the opposite is happening. The larger the unit, the higher the per square foot becomes. The 3-bedroom is more expensive on a per square foot than the 2-bedroom, and then the 4-bedroom is even more expensive. And in some cases, the difference is actually quite substantial. So in this case, you see the 2-bedroom to the 4-bedroom, it's almost a 200 per square foot more. So if a developer adopts the unit type jump strategy, what should we do? Personally, my first instinct would be to prioritize the smaller unit types. Why? Because if the smallest unit already has the lowest per square foot entry point, then the larger units have already transacted at a much higher per square foot level, then you immediately have a pricing buffer. Think about it. If future buyers are already willing to pay at a higher per square foot for larger units today, then as an owner of the smaller unit, you're entering at a much more attractive relative price point. So in the case for Narra Residences, if I had to rank the opportunities, I would naturally look at the 2-bedroom first, followed by the 3-bedroom compact before moving towards the larger unit types, which are of a higher per square foot. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but once you understand whether the developer is using a per floor jump, a view jump, or a unit type jump strategy, you'll start to understand where the value pockets are within the project. Now, let's put everything together with a real case study. But before we go into that, do remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel and show some love. But in any case, the project that we are looking at today is Seaside Residences. If you look at the site plan, you automatically notice that one side enjoys a very nice sea view. Naturally, many people would assume that this is exactly why buyers choose Seaside Residences, and honestly, I would agree. So let's go through our 2-step framework. Step 1, identify the USP. And for Seaside Residences, I think it's quite clear. The USP is the sea view. People aren't specifically choosing Seaside because of the facilities, because of the developer. They are choosing it because they want that sea-facing experience. Then we move on to step 2, which is understanding the developer's pricing strategy. So back then, Seaside had a few facing categories. You had the landed-facing units, you had the sea-facing units, and you also had certain units that enjoyed a partial sea and partial landed view. Now that's where things get interesting. When we look at launch pricing, the sea-facing units were actually not loaded with a significant price premium. In fact, some of the sea-facing units were priced even more attractively than some of the alternative facing. And when I saw this, my immediate thought was, this is a no-brainer. Because if the USP is sea view, and the sea view isn't commanding a huge premium, why wouldn't I choose the sea-facing stack? I'm getting the USP. And I'm not paying an excessive premium for it. And that's exactly the sweet spot we are trying to identify. Now, if we go one step further, Seaside Residence also adopted the per floor jump strategy. So if I were to wind back time, if I were to be standing in the queue on launch day, my decision would actually be quite straightforward. First, I would prioritize the sea-facing stack because that's a USP. And second, I will avoid paying excessive premiums for the very high floors. Instead, I will probably look somewhere in the low to mid-floor range, ideally a floor high enough to enjoy the sea view. If not, I'll just be looking at the greenery or the facilities. Because remember here, we're not just trying to buy the best unit, we're trying to buy the best value unit because we need to think out of our future exits. And when we look at what happened subsequently in the resale market, that's actually where some of the strongest profits were generated. So what can we learn from all of this? For me, the ideal scenario is very simple. You buy into the USP and you buy at a reasonable price, and that's the sweet spot. Then the next so-so scenario is when you buy cheap but without the USP. Will you still make money? Possibly. In fact, you may still do quite well, but your upside may not be fully maximized because you are missing the very thing that attracts buyers to this project in the first place. Then we have the scenario whereby you buy the USP but you pay too much for it. This isn't necessarily bad because there will always be buyers who appreciate the USP. But again, because your entry price is already very high, your future profit margin may become much smaller. And finally, the worst case scenario is when you buy without the USP and you also pay an expensive price tag. Unfortunately, this is something we sometimes see during very popular launches, where buyers get caught up in the excitement and the FOMO. They are so focused in securing a unit that they stop evaluating whether they are actually getting good value. So whenever you are looking at a new launch, I want you to remember these two simple steps. First, identify the USP. Second, identify the developer's pricing strategy. Is it per floor jump? Is it a view jump? Is it a unit type jump? Because once you understand these two things, you'll start seeing opportunities that many buyers completely miss. So if you enjoyed today's breakdown, do remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And if you are currently looking at a new launch, but you are not quite sure on how to analyze the unit selection, feel free to scan the QR code here and reach out directly to me on WhatsApp. And I'll be more than happy to take a look and walk through it together with you. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.